His 7 cruel words, "She means nothing to me," crushed his pregnant wife's heart forever. The winter of 1884 settled over Ashford Hall like a silver veil drawn across a wound that refused to heal. Snow drifted softly beyond the towering windows, covering the gardens, fountains, and distant hedgerows in deceptive beauty. Inside, however, warmth and splendor concealed a different kind of frost, one that lived in whispered conversations, lingering glances, and the silence between a husband and wife. Hundreds of candles glittered beneath crystal chandeliers in the grand ballroom. Their golden light danced across polished marble floors and reflected from mirrors framed in gilt. Noblemen in black tailcoats moved through the crowd with measured elegance, while ladies in silk gowns drifted like living bouquets among the music and laughter. To any outsider, the Duke of Ashford's winter gala appeared the very image of aristocratic perfection. Lady Eleanor Ashford knew better. She stood alone near the tallest window in the room, one gloved hand resting protectively against the curve of her swollen stomach. At 24, she possessed the kind of beauty painters struggled to capture. Gentle brown eyes, dark curls arranged with understated grace, and features softened by kindness rather than vanity. Yet tonight there was exhaustion beneath her elegance. The child she carried would arrive within weeks, and the months preceding this evening had drained much of her former radiance. Not because of the pregnancy. Because of loneliness. The orchestra's waltz floated through the ballroom, sweet and melancholy, but Eleanor scarcely heard it. Her gaze remained fixed upon the snowy darkness beyond the glass. Once, such gatherings had filled her with excitement. Once, she had attended them on the arm of her husband. Now she attended them alone. Behind her, whispers stirred. "They say His Grace has scarcely spoken to her in months." Can such stories truly be accurate? My dear, where there is smoke, there is always fire. Eleanor kept her posture straight despite every word reaching her ears. Years of aristocratic training had taught her how to endure humiliation with dignity. A lady never revealed pain before an audience, even when her heart was breaking. Across the ballroom stood Sebastian Ashford, Duke of Ashford. Tall, dark-haired, and impossibly composed, he carried himself with the effortless authority of a man born to command respect. At 32, he was admired throughout England for his intelligence, wealth, and influence. Women admired him openly. Men sought his favor carefully. Yet none of them knew how distant he had become. Eleanor watched him from across the crowd. Once, he had smiled whenever he entered a room and found her waiting there. Once, his eyes had softened whenever she spoke. Once, she had believed herself the most cherished woman in England. Those memories felt painfully distant now. A burst of laughter drew her attention. Lady Beatrice Whitmore stood beside Sebastian. Beatrice was everything society celebrated: beautiful, confident, fashionable, and ambitious. Her sapphire gown shimmered beneath the chandeliers as she leaned closer to the Duke than propriety required. Several nearby guests noticed. Several more pretended not to. Eleanor felt a familiar ache settle inside her chest. For months she had ignored rumors. For months she had defended her husband against gossip. For months she had convinced herself that appearances deceived. Tonight, however, uncertainty felt heavier than ever. The conversation surrounding Sebastian grew larger as more guests drifted near. Curiosity was the most irresistible entertainment available to aristocratic society. Beatrice smiled brightly. "Your Grace," she said loud enough for others to hear, "surely you grow weary of being questioned about domestic matters." Several listeners chuckled. Sebastian offered a faint smile. "I rarely concern myself with gossip." "Then perhaps you can settle it for us." Beatrice tilted her head innocently. "Everyone wishes to know whether the Duchess still occupies such an important place in your affections." Silence followed. Not complete silence. The orchestra continued playing. Glasses still clinked. Footsteps still crossed marble floors. Yet around that conversation, anticipation gathered like thunderclouds. Eleanor felt her pulse quicken. Surely he would dismiss the question. Surely he would laugh. Surely he would defend her. Instead, Sebastian glanced briefly across the ballroom. For a single terrible second their eyes met. Then he looked away. His expression hardened. And he spoke 7 words that shattered everything. "She means nothing to me now." The sentence was not shouted. It did not need to be. Those 7 words sliced through the ballroom more sharply than any scream. The surrounding guests froze. Some looked shocked. Others looked fascinated. A few looked pleased. Eleanor stood perfectly still. The world continued moving around her, yet she felt strangely detached from it, as though she were watching her own life from a great distance. Heat rushed to her face. Her throat tightened. Every memory of love, Every promise exchanged before the altar, every tender moment they had shared seemed to crumble at once. No one approached her. No one defended her. The whispers returned immediately, multiplying like sparks carried by wind. Eleanor lowered her gaze before anyone could witness the tears gathering there. With quiet grace she turned and walked away. Past the dancers. Past the musicians. Past the glittering crowd. No one stopped her. Outside, the night air struck her face like ice. Snowflakes drifted through the darkness as she reached the deserted winter garden overlooking the frozen reflecting pool. There, hidden from society's eyes at last, her composure finally broke. One trembling hand covered her mouth while the other clutched a small silver rattle concealed within her cloak. A gift intended for Sebastian, a joyful announcement she could no longer bear to give. As tears blurred the lantern lights, a sudden sharp pain tightened across her abdomen, and for the first time that night, fear eclipsed heartbreak. The pain that seized Eleanor in the winter garden did not become the catastrophe she feared, yet it was enough to summon alarm throughout Ashford Hall before dawn. Servants hurried through shadowed corridors carrying lamps. Doctors arrived with leather cases and grave expressions. By sunrise, the Duchess lay confined to her bedchamber beneath embroidered coverlets, her face pale against the pillows while snow tapped softly against the tall windows. The child remained safe, the physician assured her, but only if she avoided distress. The warning felt almost cruel. Distress had become the atmosphere in which she lived. For 3 days Eleanor scarcely left her room. The grand manor continued its routines beyond her door, yet she felt removed from it, like a portrait forgotten in an abandoned gallery. Trays of untouched meals were carried away. Letters remained unopened. Whenever she closed her eyes, she heard the same 7 words echoing through the ballroom. She means nothing to me now. Their power no longer lay in their sound but in the certainty behind them. A husband might speak in anger and regret it. Sebastian had spoken with calm indifference. That was the wound she could not escape. The elderly servant who had witnessed her collapse was named Mr. Hawthorne. He had served the Ashford family since Sebastian's childhood and possessed the rare courage that loyalty sometimes grants. On the 4th morning he entered the Duke's study carrying a small velvet box. Sebastian stood near the fire reviewing estate correspondence, his expression unreadable. Without ceremony, Hawthorne informed him that the Duchess had heard every word spoken at the gala. For a moment Sebastian merely stared into the flames. Then he answered, "The matter cannot be undone." The response sounded cold even to him. Yet after Hawthorne departed, the letters on his desk remained unread. The velvet box drew his attention at last. Inside rested a silver baby rattle, exquisitely crafted, its polished surface reflecting the firelight. Beneath it lay a folded note written in Eleanor's elegant hand. Sebastian unfolded the paper slowly. Only one sentence appeared upon it. "For our son whom I pray will know his father's love." The words struck with unexpected force. He read them once. Then again. The room seemed suddenly smaller. The crackling fire, the ticking clock, the distant wind beyond the windows all faded beneath the weight of a truth he had avoided for months. Memory proved a merciless companion. Throughout that afternoon fragments of the past returned uninvited. He remembered a summer garden where Eleanor had laughed while chasing rose petals across the lawn. He remembered their first dance beneath lanterns glowing like stars. He remembered how easily she once trusted him. Those recollections carried no bitterness. That was precisely what made them painful. Somewhere between fear and silence, he had allowed affection to become distance. Somewhere between duty and pride, he had convinced himself that withdrawal was easier than vulnerability. Now he wondered how many injuries could be inflicted without ever raising one's voice. Beyond the manor walls, scandal spread with astonishing speed. London newspapers and society circulars transformed rumor into entertainment. Anonymous columns hinted at the collapse of the Ashford marriage. Some claimed the Duke intended to seek legal separation after the birth of the child. Others suggested Lady Beatrice Whitmore had already secured his affections. Elegant drawing rooms buzzed with speculation. Invitations that once arrived weekly for Eleanor suddenly ceased. Acquaintances who had praised her grace now avoided mentioning her name. Reputation, she discovered, could vanish more quickly than snowfall beneath spring rain. One afternoon her lady's maid brought several newspapers she had attempted to hide. Eleanor read every line. Each sentence seemed designed to reduce her life to a spectacle. Not one article mentioned her kindness, her loyalty, or the child she carried. They described only humiliation. By evening she sat beside the window staring across the frozen gardens. The loneliness felt heavier than before, yet something within her had changed. Tears no longer came. The hurt remained, but beneath it lay a quiet resolve. If society wished to judge her, society would not see her beg for sympathy. That same evening Sebastian attended a gathering at an exclusive gentlemen's club in London. Crystal glasses gleamed beneath gaslight while aristocrats exchanged gossip disguised as conversation. He endured several carefully phrased remarks before one gentleman finally mentioned Lady Beatrice by name and offered congratulations on his supposed future happiness. Laughter followed. Sebastian set down his glass with deliberate care. The room gradually fell silent. "You speak of my wife with remarkable confidence for men who know nothing of her character," he said. His voice remained calm, but every word carried steel. "Lady Eleanor Ashford possesses more dignity than all such rumors combined." The declaration traveled through society almost as quickly as the scandal itself. Some interpreted it as loyalty. Others dismissed it as damage control. Yet for the first time since the Gala, Eleanor heard whispers that did not portray her as abandoned. Hawthorne quietly informed her of what had occurred. She listened without comment. Part of her wanted to believe the defense mattered. Another part remembered standing alone beside the ballroom window. A public correction could not erase a private wound. Nevertheless, that night she touched the empty place beside her bed and wondered whether remorse had finally entered her husband's heart. Near midnight, while rain replaced snow against the manor windows, a messenger arrived from London carrying an unsigned letter. The envelope bore no crest and no return address. Intrigued, Sebastian broke the seal beneath the light of a solitary lamp. Several pages slid into his hands. As he read, the color slowly drained from his face. The letter contained dates, witnesses, and detailed accounts of conversations carefully manipulated over many months. At the bottom appeared a single sentence written in hurried ink. "If you wish to know who destroyed your marriage, begin with Lady Beatrice Whitmore." And suddenly every certainty he possessed seemed fragile, incomplete, and false indeed now. The anonymous letter remained on Sebastian Ashford's desk long after the candles had burned low. Rain lashed against the manor windows while shadows gathered in the corners of the study, yet he scarcely noticed the passing hours. Every line demanded to be read again. Dates matched conversations he remembered. Witnesses confirmed encounters he had dismissed. Small incidents that once appeared meaningless now formed a pattern impossible to ignore. Piece by piece, a disturbing picture emerged. Lady Beatrice Whitmore had not merely encouraged gossip. She had cultivated it, guiding misunderstandings with careful precision until suspicion and silence flourished where trust once lived. By dawn, Sebastian found himself questioning months of assumptions. He recalled moments when Eleanor's eyes had searched his face, seeking reassurance he never offered. He remembered invitations she had declined after hearing rumors linking him to Beatrice. He remembered choosing distance instead of explanation. None of those wounds had been inflicted by Beatrice alone. Manipulation had opened the door, but pride had allowed it to enter. That realization unsettled him more deeply than any accusation. The following afternoon he traveled to London and quietly began verifying the contents of the letter. Servants spoke reluctantly. Acquaintances recalled conversations. A former companion of Beatrice revealed details she had never intended to become public. Everywhere Sebastian turned, evidence accumulated. No single revelation was dramatic. Together, however, they formed something devastating. Beatrice had repeatedly arranged situations designed to provoke jealousy. She had encouraged society's whispers while presenting herself as innocent. Most painful of all, she had ensured Eleanor would hear selective remarks and witness misleading encounters. The scheme succeeded because Sebastian never recognized it until too late. When he returned to Ashford Hall, snow had vanished from the grounds, replaced by gray skies and restless wind. The manor seemed quieter than ever. Servants lowered their voices when he passed. Footsteps echoed through hallways lined with ancestral portraits. Everywhere he looked, he felt the consequences of his own absence. A house could remain occupied and still feel abandoned. That evening he stood outside Eleanor's bedchamber door. For several moments he did nothing. The polished brass handle remained untouched beneath his hand. Months of distance had created a barrier more intimidating than any locked door. At last he entered. The room glowed softly beneath lamplight. Firelight flickered across floral wallpaper and embroidered curtains. Eleanor sat beside the window wrapped in a pale shawl, one hand resting upon the curve of her stomach. The fading daylight painted silver highlights through her dark hair. She looked healthier than she had after the gala, yet sadness lingered within her expression like a permanent shadow. When she saw him, surprise briefly crossed her face. Then caution replaced it. Neither spoke immediately. The silence felt fragile. Sebastian realized he could command estates, negotiate with ministers, and address crowded assemblies without hesitation, yet he struggled to find words before the woman he had married. Finally he stepped forward. "I owe you an apology." Eleanor regarded him steadily. "Only one." The question carried no anger. That made it hurt more. He lowered his gaze. "No. More than I can properly express." A gust of wind rattled the windows. Still she remained silent. The burden of speaking belonged to him. "I know now that many things were deliberately arranged to separate us," he said. "I know Lady Beatrice encouraged false impressions." Eleanor's eyes narrowed slightly. "And does that knowledge erase what happened?" "No." The answer came immediately. For the first time in months, honesty seemed simpler than pride. "No," he repeated. "Because regardless of what she did, the words were mine." A long silence followed. The fire crackled softly. Somewhere beyond the room, a clock chimed the hour. Eleanor turned toward the window. "Cruelty from strangers wounds the skin, Your Grace," she said quietly. "Cruelty from a husband wounds the soul." The words struck harder than any accusation. Sebastian felt every syllable settle into the space between them. He crossed the room slowly and stopped beside the mantel. There were truths he had concealed for so long they had begun to feel permanent. Yet if reconciliation remained possible, those truths could no longer remain hidden. "When my mother died," he said, "I was 12 years old." Eleanor looked at him again. His voice remained controlled but barely. "She died bringing my younger brother into the world. Neither survived." The room seemed suddenly still. "I spent years believing I had accepted it. Then you told me about the child." His eyes drifted toward her stomach. "And I became terrified." Confusion softened her expression. Sebastian continued. "Every physician's visit. Every moment you seemed tired. Every mention of childbirth. I feared losing you exactly as my father lost her." The confession lingered in the air. "I should have shared that fear with you," he said. "Instead, I retreated from it. I convinced myself distance would somehow lessen the pain if the worst occurred." Eleanor stared at him. For the first time she saw not coldness but vulnerability. Not indifference. Fear. A deeply flawed, profoundly human fear. Tears gathered in her eyes, though she blinked them away. "You pushed me away because you loved me?" "I pushed you away because I was a coward." The admission came without hesitation. Months earlier he could never have spoken those words. Now they felt necessary. He reached into his coat and removed a small wooden box. The polished surface bore delicate carvings worn smooth with age. Eleanor recognized it instantly. Their music box. Years earlier it had accompanied their first dance during courtship. After falling and breaking, it had disappeared from the manor. She stared as Sebastian placed it gently upon the table. "I found it in storage," he said. "I had it repaired." He wound the mechanism. A familiar melody drifted into the room. Soft, tender, unmistakable. The notes carried memories neither of them could escape. Summer evenings. Shared laughter. Promises whispered beneath lantern light. For a moment neither spoke. The distance between them no longer felt impossible. Yet neither did it feel healed. Trust, once broken, could not be restored by a single confession. Still, something had shifted. Something fragile. Something hopeful. As the melody faded, Eleanor opened her mouth to speak. Before she could, a sharp pain crossed her face. Her hand flew to her abdomen. Another pain followed almost immediately, stronger than the first. The music box fell silent. Outside, thunder rolled across the darkening sky. And suddenly both husband and wife understood the same terrifying possibility. The child was coming far sooner than anyone expected tonight. The first contraction had barely passed before Ashford Hall erupted into motion. Servants hurried through candlelit corridors carrying basins, linens, and lanterns. Footmen raced across the rain-soaked courtyard to summon physicians from neighboring estates. Thunder rolled across the countryside like distant cannon fire, rattling the tall windows of the manor. Outside, fierce winds bent the ancient trees surrounding the estate. Inside, an entirely different storm threatened to tear a family apart or bind it together forever. Eleanor gripped the edge of the bed as another wave of pain seized her. The room swam briefly before her eyes. She had imagined this moment many times during the long months of pregnancy, yet never like this. Not amid unresolved heartbreak. Not with uncertainty still lingering between herself and the man she loved. Sebastian remained at her side. For the first time in months he did not retreat. He held her trembling hand while physicians prepared the chamber. Every instinct urged him to remain strong, composed, and commanding. Yet beneath that carefully controlled exterior, fear clawed mercilessly at his chest. The memories he had confessed only hours earlier now returned with brutal clarity. He saw his father's grief. He remembered the funeral. He remembered the silence that settled over his childhood home after his mother's death. And now he feared history might repeat itself. A physician approached him quietly. "Your Grace, it would be best if you waited outside." Sebastian looked toward Eleanor. Their eyes met. Only days ago such a glance would have been filled with distance and pain. Now something else existed there. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But understanding. And understanding was often the first fragile bridge back toward love. He kissed her hand gently. "I shall be close." Eleanor nodded. As the door closed behind him, Sebastian entered the long corridor beyond the bedchamber and discovered that waiting was far more difficult than action. Minutes stretched into hours. The grandfather clock at the far end of the hallway seemed to mock him with every measured tick. Servants moved carefully through the corridor, speaking in whispers. Rain hammered against stained glass windows while lightning illuminated the manor in brief flashes of silver. The entire household appeared suspended between hope and fear. Word of the difficult labor spread quickly through the estate. Family members, trusted servants, and longtime retainers quietly gathered throughout the night. Many had watched Sebastian and Eleanor fall in love years earlier. Many had also witnessed the painful distance that followed. Tonight, however, those divisions felt insignificant compared to the battle unfolding beyond the bedchamber door. Hours passed. Then more hours. No one slept. At midnight the physician emerged briefly, his expression grave. "The labor is proving difficult." Nothing more. No reassurance. No certainty. The door closed once again. Sebastian felt his composure begin to fracture. He walked toward one of the great drawing rooms where anxious relatives had gathered around dying fireplaces. Conversation ceased the moment he entered. Every face turned toward him. For years people had admired the Duke of Ashford for his confidence. Tonight they witnessed something rarer. His humanity. Sebastian stood before them, exhausted and vulnerable beneath the flickering candlelight. "I have spent much of my life believing strength meant silence," he said quietly. No one interrupted. The storm outside seemed to pause. "I believed protecting those I loved required distance from my fears. I now understand how deeply mistaken I was." His voice carried through the room with remarkable clarity. "I failed my wife." Several guests lowered their eyes. Others listened in stunned silence. The proud Duke seldom admitted fault. Yet tonight pride seemed meaningless. "If heaven grants me one mercy before dawn," he continued, "it shall be the chance to spend the remainder of my life earning Eleanor's forgiveness." The confession settled over the room like sacred truth. Not a single person doubted him. At that moment the carefully crafted image society had built around Sebastian Ashford disappeared. What remained was simply a husband terrified of losing the woman he loved. Across the county, scandal had once painted Eleanor as unwanted. Now everyone present understood the reality. She was cherished. Deeply. Completely. Desperately. Meanwhile another truth began quietly spreading beyond the manor walls. Evidence gathered during Sebastian's investigation had finally reached influential members of society. Witnesses came forward. Letters surfaced. Conversations were corroborated. By morning there could be little doubt regarding Lady Beatrice Whitmore's manipulation. The architect of the scandal was exposed. The rumors she had cultivated collapsed almost overnight. Yet Sebastian scarcely cared. His entire world existed behind a single closed door. Near 3 o'clock in the morning a cry echoed through the corridor. Then another. Then silence. Every heart in the manor stopped. The door opened suddenly. The physician emerged. For one terrible moment his expression revealed nothing. Sebastian crossed the corridor immediately. "The child?" A smile appeared. "A son, Your Grace." Relief struck with such force that Sebastian nearly staggered. A son. His son. For several seconds he could not speak. The household erupted into tears, prayers, and joyful disbelief. Servants embraced one another. Elderly retainers openly wept. After months of sorrow, happiness finally seemed within reach. Then Sebastian noticed something. The physician's smile had vanished. A heavy silence returned. "What is it?" Sebastian asked. The older man's gaze shifted toward the floor. "The child is healthy." The words came slowly. Too slowly. Fear returned at once. "And the Duchess?" The physician hesitated. In that hesitation lived every nightmare Sebastian had carried since childhood. every fear, every regret, every unspoken prayer. Finally the physician answered. Her Grace lost a great deal of strength during the delivery. The corridor seemed to darken around him. Will she recover? No immediate answer came. Only thunder in the distance. Only rain against the windows. Only the terrible weight of uncertainty. The physician removed his spectacles and looked directly into Sebastian's eyes. We have done everything possible. The word struck harder than any blow. Sebastian stared past him toward the partially open door where candlelight spilled into the corridor. Somewhere beyond that threshold lay Eleanor, the woman whose heart he had broken, the woman he had finally confessed his love to, the woman who had just given birth to their son. And now she remained motionless, neither awake nor gone, caught somewhere between life and loss. As dawn's first pale light crept through the stained glass windows, Sebastian stepped toward her chamber with his newborn child in his arms, praying that the next words spoken in that room would not become the final ones she would ever hear. Dawn arrived reluctantly over Ashford Hall, washing the stained glass windows with pale gold light that seemed too gentle for the anguish lingering within the manor. The storm had passed, yet its echoes remained. Rainwater dripped from stone ledges outside. The ancient trees stood motionless beneath a sky slowly brightening with morning. Inside, however, time appeared suspended. Sebastian Ashford sat beside Eleanor's bed with his newborn son sleeping in his arms. The infant's tiny chest rose and fell with peaceful certainty, unaware of the fear surrounding his first hours in the world. Eleanor remained still. The physician's words continued to haunt every corner of the room. We have done everything possible. No promise. No guarantee. Only hope. And hope, Sebastian discovered, could be both a comfort and a torment. The hours passed quietly. Servants entered only when necessary. The physicians checked Eleanor's condition before withdrawing once more. Family members waited elsewhere in the manor, unwilling to intrude upon the private grief unfolding within the bedchamber. Sebastian never left. The child occasionally stirred against his chest, making small sounds that reminded him life was continuing even while his heart remained trapped in uncertainty. At one point Hawthorne entered carrying a tray of untouched food. Your Grace should eat something. Sebastian barely looked up. I am not hungry. The old servant hesitated. Then he placed something beside the bed. The silver baby rattle. The same gift Eleanor had intended to present on the night of the gala. The sight of it struck him harder than expected. For months he had allowed fear to convince him that distance was protection. Now the tiny object represented everything he nearly lost. A wife. A child. A future. After Hawthorne departed, Sebastian stared at Eleanor for a long time. The silence felt unbearable. At last he began to speak. Not because he expected her to hear. Because there were truths he could no longer keep buried. When we first met, he said quietly, I believed you were far too brave for your own good. A faint smile touched his lips. You argued with me within 10 minutes. The baby shifted slightly. Sebastian adjusted the blanket around him. You challenged every certainty I possessed. You made me laugh when I wished to remain serious. You made this house feel alive. His voice grew softer. And I never thanked you for it. The room offered no reply. Only the gentle ticking of the clock. Yet he continued. Words that had remained trapped for months now emerged freely. He spoke about their courtship. Their first dance. The day she accepted his proposal. The mornings they spent riding through the countryside. The evenings they shared beside library fires discussing books neither of them finished because conversation proved more interesting. Memory after memory filled the room. Each one carried equal measures of joy and regret. Eventually Sebastian opened a drawer within the bedside table. Inside rested a collection of letters. Dozens of them. Letters he had written during sleepless nights throughout Eleanor's pregnancy. Letters he never delivered. Letters filled with fears he lacked the courage to speak aloud. One by one he began reading them. Some described his terror of losing her. Others confessed his confusion. Several contained apologies he had never voiced. A few simply declared his love. Hours passed. The morning faded into afternoon. Still he read. The final letter remained folded longer than the others. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. The words inside had been written only days before the gala. Written before everything collapsed. Written when he still believed silence was strength. I have spent months pretending distance will protect us both, he read softly. The truth is far simpler. I love you more than I know how to survive losing you. Every day I wake fearing the future. Every night I hate myself for allowing that fear to wound you. His voice broke. For the first time since childhood, Sebastian Ashford wept openly. Not as a duke. Not as an aristocrat. Not as a man concerned with appearances. Simply as a husband. He reached for Eleanor's hand. Her skin felt warm beneath his fingers. Desperately, he lowered his head. "You meant everything to me then," he whispered. Tears fell freely now. "You mean everything to me now." His grip tightened gently. "You always will." The words hung in the stillness. Seconds passed. Then more. Nothing happened. The silence seemed endless. And then, a faint movement. So slight he thought he imagined it. Sebastian lifted his head immediately. His breath caught. Eleanor's fingers had moved. Only slightly. But unmistakably. Hope exploded within him. "Eleanor?" Another movement followed. This time stronger. Her eyelashes fluttered. The physicians were summoned at once. Footsteps thundered through the corridor. Servants rushed into motion. Yet Sebastian scarcely noticed any of it. His entire world narrowed to the woman before him. Slowly, painfully, Eleanor opened her eyes. The room appeared blurred. Sunlight streamed through the curtains. Voices sounded distant. Then her gaze found Sebastian. For several seconds neither spoke. Emotion filled the silence. Months of hurt, fear, regret, love. Everything existed within that single look. Finally Eleanor noticed the child resting in his arms. A tear slipped down her cheek. "Our son?" Sebastian smiled through tears of his own. "Healthy." Relief washed across her features. The tension that had haunted her expression for months finally eased. Then she looked back at him. "I heard you." His breath caught. "How much?" A faint smile appeared. "Enough." The simple answer carried extraordinary power. Enough to hear the truth. Enough to hear the love. Enough to hear the apology. Neither pretended the past had vanished. Pain did not disappear because of one conversation. Trust did not magically repair itself. But something more important had happened. The healing had begun. Months later, spring transformed the Ashford estate into a landscape of color. Roses bloomed throughout the gardens. Sunlight replaced winter shadows. The scandal that once threatened Eleanor's reputation had completely unraveled. Lady Beatrice Whitmore found herself excluded from the very society she had manipulated. Her influence vanished as swiftly as it had risen. Meanwhile, Eleanor's strength returned. So did her laughter. So did the warmth that had once filled Ashford Hall. One bright afternoon the estate hosted a grand garden celebration. Noble families traveled from across the county. Musicians performed beneath flowering trees. Children ran through the pathways between rose bushes. At the center of it all stood Sebastian and Eleanor. Together. Not because society expected it. Because they chose it. Before their assembled guests, Sebastian publicly renewed the vows he had once nearly destroyed through silence. Every word carried sincerity earned through suffering. Every promise reflected lessons learned through loss. When the ceremony ended, he lifted Eleanor's hand and kissed it exactly as he had the day they first met. This time she smiled without hesitation. Years later many would remember Sebastian Ashford as a powerful duke. Others would remember his estates, his influence, and his achievements. Yet those who knew the truth remembered something else. They remembered a man who nearly lost everything because of 7 careless words. They remembered a woman whose dignity endured humiliation without surrendering its grace. And they remembered that love, though fragile enough to be wounded by a sentence, can sometimes prove strong enough to survive one. As evening settled over the blooming gardens, their young son laughed among the roses while his parents watched from a nearby bench. Resting beside them sat 2 treasured objects, a silver baby rattle and an old music box. One symbolized the pain that nearly tore them apart. The other symbolized the memories that brought them back together. The melody drifted softly into the spring air as the sun disappeared beyond the horizon, and for the first time in many months, the future no longer felt uncertain. It felt like home.